Hey, are you ready for another rousing 30-year-old video game review? Well, too bad, you're getting it anyway. And if you want to be technical about it, this game is actually closer to 35 years old at this point, if you look at its original incarnation. Today, in honor of the Nationals doing probably the most improbable thing I've ever heard of, and winning 4 road games to win the 2019 World Series, we're taking a look at the first game in Accolade's Sim Baseball series, Hardball. Hardball was released by Accolade for the Genesis in 1991, full 6 years after its initial release on home PCs in 1985. I was one of the people to play that original version of the game, playing it on the Commodore 64. But not in 1985, come on, I'm not that old. No, I experienced it a little later, probably closer to the time that the actual Genesis version was released. The Commodore 64 was my first home computer, as I inherited it from my uncles who had moved on to other things, and a nice box copy of Hardball was one of the things I got with it, amongst an entire box of other games that I really wish I still had. Someone on eBay got an absolute steal of a deal back in 1998. Anyway, this video isn't for me to commiserate regret over poor youthful decisions. It's to discuss Hardball and my experience playing it this last week, which might be considered a poor, not so youthful decision, but that's getting ahead of ourselves. In that original version of Hardball, and the Commodore 64 version was the original version, coming before the PC, Macintosh, Apple II, and all other versions, the game allowed you to choose between 2 teams and 2 teams only, with one clad in red and the other in blue. Hardball was so successful that not only was it ported to all of those aforementioned computers, it also spawned a series with 5 sequels following its release. This Genesis version is a bit of a curiosity. It actually was released after Hardball 2 made its way onto the Amiga, DOS, and Macintosh in late 1989. I should mention the Genesis featured more than a few Amiga-based ports to the console, partially due to its shared Motorola 68000 processor. And the Genesis never received a port of Hardball 2, skipping straight to Hardball 3 in 1992. So is the game we're looking at today really a port of the original Hardball, or is it a port of Hardball 2 under a different label, as to not confuse console players who may not have been familiar with the original home computer game? Well, based on what I can tell from screenshots looking at the game, it's actually neither. Hardball on the Genesis is a re-imaging of the original Hardball, with the addition of a full complement of league teams rather than just the Champs and the All-Stars, the 2 teams from the original game, and an attempt at upgraded graphics and sound. More details on that in a bit. But Hardball on the Genesis is definitely not a port of Hardball 2, as it lacks most of the additional features that Hardball 2 added. Why Accolade decided to do this is beyond me. If you're going to go through the trouble of porting a game, I don't see why you wouldn't just port your most recent game instead. All I can figure is that perhaps some of the features that Hardball 2 added may not have translated well to a console, and that the original Hardball was certainly a much easier game for them to program and release to the market. Having said all that, is Hardball on the Genesis worth playing? Did the port/re-imaging get everything right, or were there issues with the translation? And why on earth did they get famous artist Boris Vallejo to do the cover of the game? We'll discuss all those things, but first, let's take a look at the physical release. Okay, here's Hardball. Or let me say that correctly. Hardball. I want to make sure I emphasize the name with that exclamation point on the end of it there. Hardball, being a first-generation Accolade release, was not a Sega licensee at the time, and as a result, they used these cardboard slipcases that were more similar to something that jewelry would come in. And if you remember, when we looked at Super Off-Road back in episode 11, it came in a similar box. However, I'd like to point out that this title is slightly different in that it's a reprint of the original release, but one done soon enough after the original release so that it was still from a time that Accolade wasn't a proper licensee, so they still used the cardboard box. And there's no Sega seal of approval anywhere on the box. It's pretty easy to tell it's the re-release version with the black Video Game Classics bar going across the top of the box. Also, the original cover, as you can see, is inset here on top of this red and black checkerboard background as opposed to taking up the entire cover. For the super collectors out there, it looks like, along with Hardball,
Also, Mike Dick of Power Football, The Duel Test Drive 2, Double Dragon, Super Off-Road, and Winter Challenge all got the Video Game Classics treatment if you're interested in alternate versions. Personally, I don't care that much, but if I can find the original version for cheap, I'll probably pick it up just because the original cover certainly looks much better than having all this trash on here. Let's talk about that original cover for a minute. As you can see, it's a painting of a ridiculously buff baseball player, a strange sort of mashup between Conan and one of the Bash brothers. We'll go with Jose Canseco. Apparently, Accolade got Boris Vallejo to step outside his normal fantasy box and whip this up, and I've got to say, it definitely does stand out. I didn't realize this before doing this review, but he actually painted a few covers for Accolade games, and they all had a free poster offer, as you can see up here at the top of the box. Regardless of the game itself being any good or not, those posters I think would be pretty cool collector's items to have in 2019. I did a quick search on eBay and I couldn't find any of them, so it makes me wonder if they were ever actually shipped out to people or not. Moving on, the box is in okay shape. It's certainly not perfect, but obviously cardboard is going to take more of a beating than a plastic clamshell. However, other than the occasional scuff, I can see up here in like the corners and such, and a few small holes at the top. Like I don't know what's going on here, but there's definitely some punctures here, and there was a hole that went through here. The box is held up well. I mean, structurally, it's intact. There's no busted corners or anything, and it doesn't look like anyone ever stepped on it. Over on the back, at the very top, it mentions that poster offer, like I said, and then attempts to sell the game with a mix of bullet points, flavor text, and screenshots. The screenshots are decent, but you can tell if you look close that they were taken with a camera instead of a proper screen capture device, as they're just a bit blurry. And like if you look here, you can kind of see on the corners how they're rounded, like you would have on a CRT. Also, one thing I'd like to point out is this claim at the top here, which is kind of interesting, that this is the first 8 megabit sports game. And it seemed a little odd to me, but I did some research and I think that's actually true, assuming you don't include the Neo Geo. Kind of a weird bit of trivia that, again, I wouldn't know if I wasn't doing these reviews. I love that about this channel. A lot of times I will find out things that no one in the world will ever care about. But to me, it's interesting. It's like you go up to someone's like, "Hey, did you know that this was the first ever 8 megabyte sports game?" And of course, people just tell me to go away. But anyway, then opening the package up, you see the usual oddly shaped Accolade cartridge, which of course is tough to get out of the cardboard. And it's like the EA cartridges where they're a bit taller. You can tell they just organized the internal circuit board differently than Sega did theirs. And it's all intact and in good shape. There's a little bit of the label lifting over here in the corner, but nothing too bad. And then the manual's in good shape, and it's got some heft to it. It's larger than the usual Genesis manual, both in thickness and in just general in size. And it reminds me more of a computer game manual. And like a stereotypical computer game manual, it's a little dry. If you look through here, there's a lot of text. A lot of text. Not so heavy on the screenshots. There's a few screenshots, but a lot of text. It does do an excellent job of explaining the game, if you actually bother to read it. The game is not super complicated, so you can pick it up and play without really reading the manual, but you'll certainly have a better time if you at least give it a proper once-over. Alright, without further ado, let's see if Hardball on the Genesis is worthy of a line of video games named the Video Game Classics, or if it's just another sports title to pretty cover. Sports games in general fall into three types: arcade-ish titles, simulation-based titles that focus more on the stats and gameplay, and then a mix of the two, which try to mix realistic sports experiences with fun, simpler gameplay. Hardball, at least in its original incarnation on home computers, fell more into the simulation side of things, and that was pretty normal for a computer title at the time. Specifically from my experience with the Commodore 64 original, games were low-scoring affairs where a few bad pitches or lucky hits could be the difference between winning and losing. Accolade carries that same style of gameplay over the Genesis almost directly, albeit with upgraded graphics to Hardball's signature design element, the pitcher-batter interface. In the vast majority of console and arcade baseball games, the pitcher is placed in the top center of the screen, and he pitches down to the batter, who is located at the center on the bottom of the screen, and the camera is behind the batter in sort of a three-quarters view. Hardball takes a different approach and instead positions the camera behind and to the right of the pitcher, with the pitcher being in the lower left-hand corner of the screen and the batter in the upper right-hand corner. It's an interesting approach, and one that fits in more with the sim-based roots. However, I've got to say different does not equal better, at least not in all cases. This view is a vast improvement for pitching and really allows the player to better focus on what types of pitches they're going to throw and the location where they want the ball to go, as opposed to the games that use the more traditional view where the actual height of the pitch is lost. The problem comes when attempting to bat. While this view is much better for accurate pitching, it becomes very difficult for hitting. Timing of the pitches isn't too bad, and you can get adjusted to that in a game or so, but trying to gauge whether you should swing high, normal, or low becomes a split-second affair. As to time the pitch across the plate properly, you have to start your swing almost as soon as it's out of the pitcher's hand. The pitching-centric camera angle is a nice idea, however. If it could be matched up with a batting-centric view for one-player games, I think that would be the best possible result. I think Tecmo Super Baseball does this, and possibly some of the later Hardball sequels, so we'll see eventually if they get this figured out. Along with the functional aspects of the camera angle, I really like the HUD that's displayed during batting. It's not too cluttered, keeping the focus on the action where it should be, but there's tons of information presented. During an at-bat, you'll see all the normal stuff you'd expect, like balls, strikes, and outs, and the score, but you also see the pitcher's pitch count and speed of last pitch. And the runners that are on base will be shown with either green, yellow, or red icons, indicating the player's relative speed. It's all very well organized, and you can tell that Accolade spent a decent amount of time designing the layout. Once you get beyond the pitching-batting screen, well, things get a bit rocky. Let's say you or the computer puts a ball on a play. At that point, the sound sample for the player closest to the ball will play, signifying which position player is being controlled. The ball will start to move out into the field and will be shown by a small white dot, or for fly balls, be indicated by a small black shadow, the same size as the ball. This creates a few problems, however. The first issue is if the ball is struck as a ground ball. Most of the time, grounders will come out incredibly fast, and by the time the game is switched to the field view, you only have a second to try to determine location and direction. Meaning that most of the time, unless the ball is hit directly to your player, you're going to misjudge or simply not react fast enough to field the ball. And while you're wasting time trying to figure out where the ball is going / went, your opponent has a base hit. Fly balls or line drives create issues as well. Due to the fact the only indication of where the ball is and where it's going to land is that small black dot, it becomes incredibly difficult to judge where your player should be to perform what should, under normal circumstances, be a routine catch. And I'm not referring to hard line drives either that would normally drop in. I'm talking about balls hit so high in the air that the game engine doesn't show the actual ball until about 2 seconds before it lands. The computer probably puts far too many balls in play than it should, but I wouldn't mind that too much if the defense wasn't so shoddy. Speaking of that field view, you know all the great things I mentioned about the pitcher-batter view? Well, forget it. It's pretty obvious that Accolade spent all their time designing the pitcher-batter view and very little on anything else. The field view looks atrocious. The individual players look like they're lifted from an 8-bit title, in both display and animation, which could somewhat be excused in a game that was released in 1989, but certainly not in 1991. The actual field doesn't look much better, mainly displaying a lot of bland green and a few stray bits of grass here and there. The stands definitely resemble an 8-bit title, with fans being represented by random dots of color, similar to what we saw previously with Great Soccer in episode 24. In fact, at least in Great Soccer, you could see where the programmers had attempted to make the pixels look like people, so this approach in Hardball is pretty embarrassing, and not befitting a title that had such a good reputation in the home computer area. The audio is another example of a very Jekyll and Hyde-ish approach to presenting a video game. Whereas the picture batter display is an example of significant effort versus the lazy field implementation, the same is true for the in-game sound effects versus the music. As stated earlier when we were looking at the box, this is an 8 megabit title, and one of the things that the Genesis specifically needs a lot of space for is digital audio samples, due to the FM sound implementation that the Genesis uses. And I must say, the speech samples in the game sound very good. Anytime a position is called out, such as third base or left field, it's clear as a bell with no distortion. The call of strike gets a bit annoying, and you can hear where it crackles a little, but that's a minor complaint. The music, on the other hand, is just embarrassing. Are you aware of a 16-bit title that only has one song included? Well, now you are, because with as much effort and care as put into the sound effects, there was almost none included regarding music, with only one in-game song that repeats forever. It literally just loops over and over and over. The game does give you the ability to turn the music off, but only at the options screen at the beginning of the game, so if you don't choose to turn it off, and then get 3 innings in, well, it's either time to hit reset or suck it up for the rest of the game. And pray you don't go to extra innings. Speaking of the options available, there's not many, but there are a few worth mentioning. Along with the aforementioned music on-off option, there's also settings for difficulty, batting, single game versus series, and whether players will commit errors or not. The difficulty and batting settings don't alter the game too much, but I did find the game more fun when I had it set to AAA and corked bats. I wouldn't say that change turns it into an arcade experience, but it definitely loosens things up a bit. The error setting seems unnecessary, as errors are part of the game, but I guess some might want to have that option. The best option available is for the batting cage, which allows you to, you guessed it, practice hitting. However, while other baseball games include a home run derby option that has a similar function of allowing you to practice your timing, the batting cage allows you to practice on all types of pitches thrown, or allow the computer to select a pitch at random. It's not anything I expect anyone to spend an inordinate amount of time with, but it is definitely a nice inclusion. When it comes to actually playing the game, players can either play against a second player, play a one-off game against the computer with teams of the player's choosing, or play a World Series Best of 7 matchup against the computer, utilizing a password save function to continue. The Genesis release of Hardball features 26 teams representing the cities of the MLB teams in 1990, which is a nice upgrade from the original home computer's version's 2 teams, but any connection to real life stops there. Hardball has no MLB or MLBPA license, and the players from the teams appear to have their stats chosen at random. In other words, sports titles without player licenses sometimes have players that seem to replicate real players in everything but name, but that's not the case here. At that point, I don't even understand why they tried to emulate the MLB structure at all. Why not have fun with it, and create crazy player team names and cities? But based on the rest of the basic features this title has, asking for that's definitely a bridge too far. There's other complaints I can make about the title, such as issues with auto base running being too conservative, weird pauses between the switching of screens, and how it's annoying to attempt to compare stats of active players when needing to sub in bench players, but there's really no point. Hardball is like a nice but dilapidated house where the owners repainted 2 of the rooms but left the rest to rot. For those 2 rooms, I'm giving Hardball 2 stars, but there's certainly better baseball games available for the Genesis. I'm interested to see where its sequels take the series.
And that was Hardball. The things that Hardball does well, it does really well for a game of its vintage, but ultimately it feels incomplete at best. As far as baseball games we've reviewed on Zilog and Moto, I think I would definitely play RBI 3 instead of Hardball, even though they both earn the same amount of stars, but I could also see that coming down to an individual's preference, as some may really prefer Hardball's unique batting pitching interface and be willing to ignore its other flaws. Tune in next week when I switch back to the Master System and I don't play a baseball title, or any sports title for that matter. Sorry, Reggie Jackson Baseball, but we'll get to you later. What's it going to be? Well, as usual, I haven't decided yet, because I'm awesome at preparation. But I've definitely been focusing on the European side of the collection recently, so maybe it'll be something we didn't see in the United States. We shall see. Remember, whatever you play, have fun, and be excellent to each other. Later.